Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Sarah Abos-Jacobson, and I'm the Barbara Rabin Chief Education Officer here at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. And I'd like to thank you for joining us for our 2023 Spring Break Survivor Series. Today you will hear from Ms. Rosian Zerner, who will share her experiences in the Kovno Ghetto and as a hidden child in Lithuania during the Holocaust. Before we begin, I would like to thank our community partners for the Spring Break Survivor Series: Congregation Sharith Israel, Dallas Institute of Humanities and Culture, Green Hill School, Hope Supply Company, Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas's Jewish Community Relations Council, Refugee Services of Texas, Southwest Jewish Congress, Temple Shalom, Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission. We are grateful for your support of the museum and our programs, and we couldn't do this without you. I would also like to extend a special welcome to our board members, volunteers in the audience. We couldn't fulfill our mission without you either. It really does take a village. If you are interested in becoming a museum member or volunteers, please visit our website at dhhrm.org. That's M as in Mary, to learn more. In just a moment, Rosian will share her story with you. Then we will have time for questions and answers. If you are joining us in person today, you can use the card that you were provided when you came to the theater to write out your question. Our staff will come around and collect it from you toward the end of Rosian's remarks. If you are joining us virtually, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to type out and submit your questions. Also, I'd like to ask that you please turn off the ringers on your cell phones, or just turn the phones off altogether if you don't need to have them going right now. And this means the adults too, okay? It is now my great pleasure to turn things over to Rosian.
And I would like to thank the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum for hosting this program and have you experience firsthand what I experienced. And also I'd like to thank the staff who makes it all happen. But most of all, I would like to thank you. I'm of the generation that is the last witness to the horrors of the Holocaust. And by being here, you too have become witnesses. You too have become witness to something that should never have happened, but it did happen. And when you leave, this is not just a piece of history. This is a human tragedy. And you all can go back and become ambassadors of truth by just joining me today in learning about what happened and knowing that it is not just history, it is not just a fantasy for some people who deny it ever happened, but it is a real never again situation, basically. We need to learn from the Holocaust, and we need to know that something like that should never happen again. But we have the headlines today, and we know that there's work to be done, and you hopefully will be out there doing that work and being the voice that can make things change for the better. So I was born in Lithuania. Okay, see that map with the red thing? It's the largest of the Baltic countries, but it fits into Texas 10 times. It's not very large, actually. The population is about 29 million, about the same as Texas, but it fits into Texas 10 times. However, at one point, it ruled all of Europe, all the way to the Black Sea, and the Russian Tsars made their seat in Lithuania because they thought it was beautiful and intellectual and aristocratic. And it's kind of funky. I mean, their language is the oldest spoken language in the world today because it is based on Sanskrit, and it went underground with all the occupations of Lithuania, from the Swedes to the Poles to the Germans to the Russians. Everybody seems to have a seesaw and a good time occupying Lithuania. And Lithuania was actually the domino effect starter for the demise of the Soviet Union when it happened. And they boast to have the first university in Lithuania. They have 6,000 lakes. Some of them are puddles, but they're there in this small country. And I was born in the capital, and that's what the capital looked in the picture on the right there. For some of you who can imagine 87 years ago, that's what it looked like. And I'm 87 now, and I went through several centuries living. It's a pretty city. It has, if you can see the river and all the homes with the red roofs, it was the last country in Europe to give up paganism for Christianity, and they're very, very religious now, even though they had a very large Jewish, vibrant population in Lithuania at the time. But this is my life before World War II. It was a happy childhood. I was born into a privileged family. We had a car, and you can see from the low license plate, there were not too many cars in Lithuania at the time. On the left is my mother, and on the right of the car is my father, and that's me holding a book. I was always with a book, and I started reading very early, and it's been one of the things that I still cherish. All right, let's go. This is already 1940, and you have the tanks coming in. My privileged life was truncated quite suddenly when the Anschluss came, and even before then. On the left, I'm in front of my father's and my grandfather's apartment building, and that was the last photograph taken of me before the war. But here is the German occupation. You see Hitler marching with his troops on the right, on the upper right, and being welcomed actually in Lithuania, because the Lithuanians, even before the Germans started their brutal destruction of Jews and Jewish civilization in Lithuania, they were very happy to comply. And you had 150 villages that were Judenfrei, which means they were cleansed of Jews even before the Germans arrived and started their methodical killing. And here on the bottom right, you see what happened just blocks away from where we lived. It was in a garage that had hoses, and hoses were put into mouths of Jews until they exploded and died. And the crowd that is watching seems very pleased with it. So that was the scenario that happened before the actual internment. On the left, you see the synagogue standing on the top photo, and then what happened to it at the end. There were like 40 synagogues and other organizations in Kaunas, where I was born, and very little was left. I think there's one now that is standing. This is what happened to us suddenly. We were told that we had to go into a ghetto. A ghetto is supposed to be a holding place. And the one in Lithuania was in a slum, no running water, no facilities, nothing that was available, that except it was the coldest winter on record in Lithuania, and there was no heat. I remember trying to drink a glass of water, and it became ice before I got it to my lips practically. We were assigned about a 10 by 10 square foot place in dilapidated area of Kaunas, and 700 calories a day of, I don't know, I remember frozen potatoes, but it was very, very meager, and people did not have enough to nourish themselves with. We were required to wear the yellow star, and you can see toddlers having to wear them. Not in all ghettos and concentration camps were toddlers required, but in ours, yes. My grandmother, my father's side, forgot to wear one when she was in a bread line, and one of her neighbors denounced her, and she was never seen again. My grandfather, on my father's side, was taken away even before we were in the ghetto, because he was what you would call today a capitalist, and they wanted to rob him of everything that he had. And rumor has it that he was tortured and humiliated before he was killed. And I never really saw him again either. Here you can see the middle photo, two women saying goodbye, because my ghetto, the Kovno Ghetto, became a concentration camp, the Kaunas concentration camp, and it became a killing field. There's a monument there now called the Ninth Fort, and it has a whole museum that holds whatever photographs that were available and shows the progression, how the murders happened. For instance, they would ask 700 intellectuals to come forward, and they would come gladly because they thought that would be a good way for them to go out, and that they were needed in some format or whatever. And they were never seen again. We were ruled by fear and by deceit. We didn't know what was happening because the Kovno Ghetto was one of the first that was established. And everybody had different stories and different rumors, but nobody could imagine that there was a government policy to kill an entire population. It would be beyond imagination, but that's what we found out later. The little boy on the right is just about my age, and I see other children here just about my age when I was in the Kovno Ghetto. The whole thing was incomprehensible to me. Like, why is this happening? What is wrong being Jewish? What did I do to deserve? I mean, the whole thing was crazy. And when we came to the ghetto, we were allowed like one cart of things that we could bring. And we didn't know what we were doing, So my mother brought this huge plant, a ficus plant, and it froze, of course, the first couple of days. But we just were totally unaware of the vast horrors that lay ahead. That's how we got our water. This is a well, and the only well, actually, that I remember. And that was for the entire ghetto. And this was a makeshift prison on the left, where friends came to see others. Of course, you see no windows, cold. Not a good time. So, but here are my rescuers. I don't know how we got to that so fast, so let's see. No? Yeah? Yeah. I think there was something else there, but what happened was the ghetto was established um, supposedly to hold Jews, but it became some place that they either were asked to go in a workforce outside the ghetto, or they were able to actually kill them there. One day there was what they call the Grosse Aktion, a large action, where all Jews were told to come at 4 o'clock in the morning into this large field that was there. And I don't know, some of you might have seen some of the movies where the selections were made to the left, to the right, and the selections were whether one is to live or whether one is to die. And about 10,000 were selected to die. The elderly and the children were dispensable. So my parents were convinced that they had to do something because I was going to be next. And they actually had a children's action that was about the same selection process, but they didn't have many children surviving because not many were able to contribute with work. So my parents risked their lives to save mine. They dug a hole under the barbed wire that surrounded the ghetto, timed the changing of the guards and the searchlights and the dogs and everything else, and started digging a hole under the barbed wire. It just took minutes before they had to dart away because they would have been killed and I wouldn't be able to escape. But they did it. They dug a hole just large enough for a 5-6-year-old to go through, and it happened in a very methodical and lengthy way, but they were determined that I should live, and so I'm forever grateful for their courage to do that and their love. And I did go through that hole. I'm here to talk to you about it. And on the other side was my father's secretary waiting for me in the shadows, and I dashed with her across. I don't think you saw that bridge on the river in the first picture in Kaunas, to what I thought was liberty. But of course, I was crying the whole time. I didn't know what was happening, and she couldn't keep me. I mean, I was endangering her life, and she had neighbors, and they knew she didn't have a child, and everybody was squealing on each other, and it was a very, very dark time. So she found some other rescuers for me, and they were mostly Russian and mostly Christian scientists, actually. The one on the left is the one that was my father's secretary, Irina Budrekaite, and I had her name during the war. My name was Irina Budrekaite. I was a baptized Catholic, and I became Irina, and I couldn't answer to any other name. And the upper right is a woman who's a Christian Scientist and a Russian aristocrat who also was a friend of my mother's who was a journalist, and she and had me in her home. The journalist in the middle picture is my mother's friend Rivka, who was Jewish, but she was a journalist, and she found these places. And the Natasha and the Pavlasha, they were both the saints who hid me, and the journalist Rivka, and also my mother at some times. But they lived right next to, it was a two-family home, and one was where they lived, and the other one was where one of the brothers lived, who was a devout Nazi. And I got whooping cough, and I couldn't stop whooping, whatever that cough is. And So they actually performed a Christian Science prayer on me, and I stopped that, and that saved everybody's life. On the bottom is Helene Holtzmann, who is a German, and she also hid Jews because her daughter on the left was one of pacifists. She would go up to a soldier with a flower and say, "Look, you're German, you're human too, you know? This is wrong, what you're doing is wrong." She was killed. So she decided to save children, and she wrote books about what she saved. And after the war, the Russians came to Lithuania and liberated Lithuania, but all the Germans were suspect, and she had to flee Lithuania after doing all these good deeds. The one on the left is her daughter, whom I saw very often in Germany after the war, and we reminisce. The picture on the bottom is my main rescuer. Her name is Lida Goloviviene, and these are all the children that she saved, including that woman with the 2 children is a Russian widow, and she too would have been killed had somebody been able to find out about her. So she had a farm, and I became a little farmer, picking apples and milking cows. And it was amazing because I had enough food for a change, because everything else has been very complicated, to say the least. So here I am on the farm on the left, and I started painting very early. You see me with flowers. I always love flowers. And the picture on the left of the flowers and on the right of the flowers is during the war. There are very few rare pictures of survivors from the war. The one on the right is when I went back to visit my rescuers, and that was, you can see, with the laundries hanging outside, and we had a well on there. The picture on the left became very famous. I will show you later. Somehow, the United Nations was picking a photograph to make a poster child for the United Nations Remembrance commemoration. And I was picked because I was smiling even during these horror times. So there I was at UNESCO in Paris, plastered all over the walls and booklets, and this picture was all over. So you never know what happens in the long run. So that is what the Russians found when they came to Lithuania. Rubble, more rubble, bodies. It was, liberation came when I was on the farm. And I remember Lithuania is as flat as Dallas practically, except there are a few hills. And I was with my mother, who came to see me at the end, and we were between 2 of these little hills, and they were shooting at each other, and we were in the middle. It was liberation, but it was, shall we say, stressful. Yeah. My mother survived the war by pretending she was a French woman. She, who lost her husband in the war, and she was a widow, she had studied piano in Paris, and she was launching a career as a concert pianist, spoke fluent French, and then she was hidden as a French woman, and she was given jobs as a French woman, and she was able to survive, even though she had to move also because everybody was suspicious of everybody else in those days, and it was not safe practically anywhere else. They say that to save a child, you need about 9 to 12 rescuers because one needs to move around. And I was in an orphanage, and I was in different places. And I didn't understand why, because I was trying to be a good girl. I didn't know why everybody hated me so much. What did I do to deserve this? And I was always afraid. And some of these emotions don't go away. When survivors meet with each other, we seem to have the same issues of trust, fear, some of the other things that we have in common that is nobody else seems to quite understand, but we experience that because the past is what makes the present, basically, in so many ways. My father was actually saved not by German, Fritz Zimmermann. My father was working in a factory with this Fritz Zimmermann on the work detail, and Fritz just didn't understand what was going on and why they're killing the Jews. They were taught that the Jews were the Untermensch, the vermin, like what is being done to Israelis right now, actually, from their enemies. And then he came, and Yiddish, which is the common language of Eastern European Jews, is based on German. They couldn't speak to each other. They saw that there were doctors and lawyers and, taxi drivers or whatever, and just like in Germany. And so he didn't understand why was this killings spree going on here. And so one day he took his truck, went into the ghetto, took my father out, saying, "Go." He did. And he walked all the way from Kaunas to Vilnius, took off his yellow star, and one of his classmates saw him, denounced him. He ended up in jail. He was released by one of his sons. A long story with this long walk that was only an hour and a half. So when he got to Vilnius, he decided he did not just want to go to his death without fighting. And he had finished the military school as well as law school in Kaunas, and he had a revolver, which was like having gold in Lithuania. So he decided to go into the woods and become a partisan, which is a resistance fighter against the Germans. And they weren't sure he was not a spy. It was a whole to-do, but they accepted him. And I don't know if you saw some of the movies it was a very difficult existence in the woods, but he survived, and my mother survived, which is just another miracle in the many, many miracles in my life that I attribute to God right now. And he and my mother and I were reunited after the war. Now, you must realize Lithuania is one of the countries that killed most of its Jews proportionate to their population. 94 to 96% of Jews were killed in Lithuania. I'm one of the 4%ers. You're looking at a 4%er. And to have an intact family, well, that was another miracle, yes. I was blessed with that as well, and I live my life in gratitude now for all the goodness that has come my way. When you see that rubble and when you see these bodies, you realize that survival is something that is precious. And this is after the war. That's me on the left with my father and with my mother. We're escaping Lithuania, actually. After the war, most Jews just wanted to get away from where they are and didn't realize other places were not that much better, but it was a new life. And we wanted to go to Israel, where we had family. My mother's side of the family left the day after I was born. They waited to see me as a baby, and then they went to Israel. So they were all there, and we had family in Israel. So my parents wanted to go there, but of course it was illegal to go to Israel in those days. So we escaped with false passports from country to country. You can see that road in the map. We ended up in prison in Hungary, where they discovered that one of our passports was fading, kind of. And my father brabbed his way out. And we ended up in Austria, which was a divided country after the war. We were in the British sector. And on the upper right, you see some British soldiers and me. And that's on the bottom left, you see some of the people trying to get their life back again with music, with camaraderie. My mother is the one with the accordion there. She swapped the piano for the accordion. It was much more portable. And we started to kind of thinking about how do we rebuild our lives? How do we become human again after the dehumanization that we experienced? That was the beginning. And to know that others experienced what we experienced in different formats, in different suffering, in different kind of situation, became a solace for all of us, because we were able to share and to rebuild our lives somewhat. You know, the scars are always there, but we try. And we actually had to go to Italy, because there were the ships that went to Israel. And we were just going to stay there until we could get out. But we couldn't get out, and we stayed there 6 years. And they were wonderful years for me. The first time I was stable in any place, and I was like 10 years old. I started school. I had friends for the first time that weren't transient. And I went to the ballet school at La Scala, which is that famous theater that was in the color picture there. And I also had some issues when we first came to Italy, because we had nothing. All was gone. We slept on cement floors in the Jewish community. We had very little to eat. My parents knew about this one place in Salvino, which could house children that were mostly orphaned, and they were being supported by Israelis for food and for lodging and so forth. And there were 700 there. And I was there right after we arrived in Italy, until my parents could put themselves back on their feet. It was an old Nazi R&R place, it with marble floors and a pool, and that we couldn't maintain because it needed money to maintain. And the place was unheated. I got frostbite, but we had food and we had companionship. And there I am in a picture that is now at the museum in Washington, doing some dancing. And we had roll calls, and you can see all the children in the picture on the bottom there. And then my father was a great businessman. He built himself, and we again had a car, and we again had places to live with each other, and we had excursions to the lakes around Milan where we lived. And life was beginning to be kind of normalized. I had I was starting school actually at 10. My education was kind of checkered. I did 3 years in one in a language I hardly knew in Italy, before coming to the United States, where I put in the 9th grade without knowing English. Then I went to college. It was a whirlwind. But as you can see, I'm smiling there. and things are looking up. This is coming over to America. We couldn't get into Israel. And the Korean War broke out. And my father, who's a very wise man, said, look, we have to go away to a country where there's no more war. We had enough of that. And if there's a war on the soil of the United States, it's the last war on earth. And yeah, he was a wise man. And we came to America, and these are our passport pictures. And here I am on the SS Independence coming over to the United States of America. And this is my life here. On the upper right is my family. I am blonde, and on the bottom left, my mother is next to me, my brother next to my mother, and my father on the right. My firstborn is on the shoulders of my brother, and the redhead is on the shoulders of me. And now they're grown up, and each has 2 children. And my brother has 2 children. And we have a family in generations. And that's just what Hitler didn't want, did he? So he lost. We won. We have many generations to come, and the Jews are here to stay. On the left bottom is where they're a little bit more grown up, and we're in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where I came from. And upper left is, and in the middle are some of my college pictures when I was in New York. In the left, I was a torch singer, a football player, and a chemistry professor. I remember that. And on the bottom is my entire family with my brother and some of his sons. And, well, not everybody is there, but you can see that we begat. And I'm so proud of each one of them. And the legacy is something that the museum was kind enough to put together when they put together this PowerPoint. My legacy is really kind of chopped because I didn't think I was a survivor until the year 2000. My parents were, but I was just a child and didn't remember anything. And then one day I woke up and I was making the same mistakes over and over again. I said, what's going on? I realized I blocked out my childhood completely. So I went back to Lithuania, I retraced my steps, and I tried to get in touch with myself. And since then, I totally devoted my 10 years for sure entirely to the commemoration and of the victims and of volunteering for survivors. So I am speaking a lot in Boston, where I came from, and in Houston. That's a picture in Houston, actually, at the March of Remembrance. On the color photo beneath that is I was instrumental in launching a commemorative stamp for one of the rescuers, Hiram Bingham IV, and I'm there with his son, who's the driving force of that stamp. 500,000 stamps are being submitted just about every year to the government, but only a few make it, so this was a big achievement, honoring a rescuer. On the bottom, you can tell I'm with John Lewis, a legend. In the middle, I am showing off a citation I received in Boston from the governor and from the Senate, who I was the first survivor to receive that because of my volunteering. I was really devoted. So under my picture of that mural, that was in Lithuania. Kaunas, the city of my birth, was chosen to be the culture city of Europe in 2022. And they used me on murals. This is just one of the photos that was out there, that was on the murals. And first they tried to kill me, then they honor me. But that's, that's how life, just accept, go with the flow. And underneath that, I don't know if you can see, are the booklets from that photo that I showed you before with the United Nations Remembrance Day. And not very clear, but it's there. As I told you, it was everywhere, and it was the introduction to the whole conference. And believe it or not, I'm there with the president of Germany before he became president. I also had a picture with the president of Lithuania and a lot of other dignitaries. But my legacy is nothing compared to what other survivors have done. I mean, think of Broadway, think of Hollywood, think of the medicine, the environment, the enormous impact that survivors have had on the United States, including politicians, and the inventions from Israel about medicine and everything else. It just, we are commanded to make it a better world. It's Lam is in gratitude, and Zahor is to remember. So when we do good deeds, it's a commandment from God. So I think we will continue to do that in spite of all the difficulties that the world is placing upon Jews. And I hope that one day, soon, hopefully, people will realize the contributions and the desire to make it a better world that the Jews have. And you can help. I mean, just by being here, you're making a statement. Just by being on the virtual presence, you're making a statement. You can all help make it a better world. Because when you go back to your families, your friends, you can tell them that there's a good way and a bad way, and there's a choice to be made, and there's a choice to be stand-upsters, as the museum says, and also a choice of being a silent contributor. So when you see an injustice, and you see an injustice against Jews, which seems to be prevalent, do something with your words, with your actions, with your deeds. You have the power, because even if it's just a small drop in the ocean, that ocean would be the less without that drop. So don't think you can't do anything. You can do something. You can do something in your closer environment. You can do something in the larger environment. And by living the truth, you can be an example to others. So I want to leave you with probably the most spoken word in Hebrew language, which is shalom. It means hello. It means goodbye. And it means from the heart to you from me. Thank you for being here. Now, stand for that. Oh, the most important. Hold it. I'll say some more. This was almost up. Yeah.
Finish up.
This is something I think you should take with you. Read it for yourself and understand the words and take it to your heart and your minds and to the world. Okay. Where are you?
Thank you,
questions.
Rosian. So I'll start with these, and we have staff going throughout the theater, so if you have any questions that you've written down, just hold the card up, and they will come and collect it from you, okay? Rosian, did you communicate or see any of your rescuers after the Holocaust?
Oh, yes. I owe them my life, you know. I was born again because of them. So my father used to send them things like, they loved coffee. So we used to send them lots of coffee to Lithuania because we weren't allowed to go back for a while. But after a while, I went back and I saw each and every one of them, and it was very emotional. It was, how can you ever thank somebody for a life? It's never good enough and enough. So I also reconstructed a grave of my aunt who was killed in Lithuania. And it's very unusual to have a grave, but I was able to do that. And I was there probably about 4 or 5 times before they all passed on. One of my rescuers was sent to Siberia afterwards by the Russians because she was a landowner. That was part of the policy. And when I was able to reconnect with her, she was back in Lithuania with teaching piano on a piano that we managed to get her. So that was very good. None of them are alive anymore.
Did you ever hear your parents tell their story, either to you or to other people?
You know, they were surrounded by their peers. They were able to communicate with others who had experienced what they experienced. When it came to telling their stories, it was almost impossible to get it out of them. But I gave my father a typewriter. Remember typewriters? For his 80th birthday. And he started writing stories. And there's a whole legacy of his writings now at in Washington at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and in magazines in Israel that were partisan things. I had to almost force them to do a testimony with the Shoah interviews by Spielberg, and they were very reticent, and what came out was not really that helpful. I don't know why I didn't start sooner, but maybe because I didn't think of myself or them as survivors, or there was a big deal about that because all their friends seemed to be survivors also. And I have regrets for not doing more, but the writings are there and the memories are there too.
Rosian, you talked about getting an education in Italy starting when you were 10. Did you get any education while you were in hiding?
I was an avid reader by 3 and 4, as you could see. So anytime there was anything that could be read in any language, I seemed to grab it. So in a way, I kind of taught myself. I did the paintings myself. And but then it happened that every time I went to school, it was in a different country, in a different language I didn't know. So, yeah, it was a little bit of a roller coaster in education. But I did get my degree in at Barnard. I went to graduate school. I had a chance to go around the world. But education is very important to Jews, from the Torah learning to being educated. And that's probably one of the reasons that they can give back so much to the world.
Rosian, do you know how long it took your parents to dig the hole and to plan for your escape?
Ooh, well, no, but I'm trying to reconstruct it right now. And if you think of changing of the guard maybe every 3-4 hours every day, it was a tedious project and a dangerous one at that. I'll have to reconstruct that someday. I never thought of it before.
What was the scariest moment for you during the Holocaust?
You know, fear permeated everything. Being on that field with the Jews being selected for death, you could palpate the fear. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why, but it was there. So I had to accept it. And sometimes it would take over, and sometimes I just go with the flow and say, you know, whatever is meant is meant. And there was one instance when I was in hiding, when a German soldier came by, and you had to pretend not to have fear. And I was a good actress. He really didn't want to leave and wanted to play with me. But there were other occasions where, when I was in the orphanage, some of the nuns denounced me, and the priest saved me, and I had to run and be hidden in a flash before I was found. There are so many instances, but the fear was the constant.
When was the last time you were in Lithuania?
Before I fractured my back. So I'm trying to figure out the exact time. But I also went there because the Lithuanians have possession of my uncle's musical scores. And I wanted to honor him in the United States by playing his music in different places. They wouldn't give me the scores, and I wanted them. Germany had some scores, and I got them, and I had performed his music in Brandeis, Harvard, California, Oregon, and so forth. I wanted to honor his life through his music. And I went back for that, as well as retracing my steps, as well as seeing the rescuers, and as well as redoing the grave of Aunt Lida. So.
How did your mother get out of the ghetto?
My mother was a very unusual person. One day she decided she was doing it. She walked out, took off her yellow star, and that was it. She went to see some friends who were very friendly. Yeah. And that was the beginning of her as a French woman. I saw her 3 times during the war, actually. When I was hiding on the farm, she came one day, and she gave me a doll. The doll was made out of woolen scraps she had been able to pull together, and she knitted that doll for me. I had that doll until it disintegrated. It was my only toy through the wartime. Yeah. So the other time she brought me 2 candies. I didn't know what a candy was anymore. And then she was my mother, and then my father's secretary had this story that I was her illegitimate daughter, and I had to call her mother. I had to call my mother, and then the person I was hiding with was my mother. I had 3 mothers for a while. So, yeah.
Were you and your family very religious or observant?
Now, I came from a secular family, even though my lineage is quite a few rabbis. Some performed miracles. And then my father couldn't understand how God could allow such a travesty to happen. And we never had any kind of religious rituals. Let's put it this way. I am very, very spiritual with God, and how could I not be? Look what it's done for me, and talk to God a lot. So, but I do not participate in the formalities of religions, and but I am very religious in my sense, yeah.
Rosian, do you remember experiencing anti-Semitism as a young child before the ghetto?
No, I had a wonderful childhood. I remember birthday parties galore. I remember excursions to the waters and the woods, and my father had money, and we did a lot of things that way, and had friends, and it just didn't last, Yeah, my pre-war life was privileged and happy. Yeah.
Okay, 2 more questions. How did you stay positive during the war and during the Holocaust?
I think I was born that way. One of my things, I always try to find what is the good. I mean, even in the evil people, I try to find what is good. In Boston, I had a German-Jewish dialogue group, which was a test of fire for me. And I also find that whenever there's darkness, there's still some light to be found anywhere. And so positive to me is just being the best I can be for the most that I can contribute, basically. And comes natural. And I wish you the same, by the way.
Final question. What is the best thing that young Americans can do to help make sure that the Holocaust never happens again?
Yeah, that's a difficult question because many organizations and many countries are trying to figure that one out. But the Holocaust is like a tidal wave in human nature from the genocides that are happening even today, and the Rwandans and the Croatians and the others who experienced it are just as bewildered as I am by why are humans doing this to each other? Animals, very few kill each other. Why do we do this to each other for any excuse we can find almost? And it's not power, it's not money, it's not, there's some kind of force that we have to counteract. And that's why it is important that you're here today, because perhaps you can help stem that tide. Perhaps you can do something to reverse the evil that is coming to us in all the headlines, lately. And I hope there's going to be some kind of light ahead of us. I do hope so, for humanity and for ourselves and for our children and children and their children. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rosian, and thank you all for joining us today. Please feel free to join us again tomorrow at 1 for another installment in this week's Spring Break Survivor Speaker Series. And I hope that the rest of you have a good day. Thanks.